Welcome to the Talking Ketamine podcast, the show where we explore the science behind this fascinating molecule. This is episode 43. Will ketamine work for me?
Thanks for joining us. Today we're tackling the #1 question on every patient's mind. Is there any way to know, before I spend the money and time, if ketamine is actually going to work for me?
And that question is just, it's so critical. It's about more than the money. It's the emotional energy, the hope you invest.
Exactly. And today we can actually bring some real data to that question. We're drawing from a huge body of research.
Huge is right. We're looking at a systematic review of, 112 different ketamine studies over 2 decades.
That's the one. And we're also pairing it with a very practical, real-world look at 77 patients with treatment-resistant depression getting repeated IV ketamine.
So the mission today is to find those clear, actionable predictors, the things you can actually know about yourself before you even start.
That's the goal, to personalize this. And, well, we found one primary signal, an early marker, that is just incredibly powerful.
Okay, let's start right there with that actionable nugget from the study of those 77 patients. First, though, just to set the stage, did it work for them overall?
Oh, absolutely. The results were strong. You had 50.6% achieving a full response.
Wow, half of them.
And another 22.1% had a partial response. So you're looking at nearly 3/4 of these very treatment-resistant patients getting real meaningful benefit.
That's a great baseline. So within that group, how did the researchers find this early warning system for success?
They were basically tracking everyone's symptom scores, infusion by infusion, looking for the moment that the paths split. When the people who would eventually respond started to look different from those who wouldn't.
And when did that happen?
This is the amazing part. It was so fast. The split, the clear, statistically significant separation, happened right after the second treatment.
The second one? Just the second dose?
Yes, the second dose. And that early improvement signal turned out to be the single strongest predictor they found.
How strong are we talking?
Well, to get technical for a second, they use a measure called Positive Predictive Value, or PPV. Here, the PPV was 1.0.
1.0. So what does that mean in plain English?
It means it was perfect. Every single person who showed this specific early improvement went on to have a partial or full response by the end of the whole course.
100%.
100%. It was a flawless positive signal.
Okay, so we have to define this early improvement. What was the threshold? What did a patient have to feel or show after that second infusion?
Yeah, this is where it gets so specific and, well, surprisingly small.
Mm.
The optimal threshold the data pointed to was a score reduction of just 4.1% on the PHQ-9 scale.
4.1%. Let's just pause on that. The PHQ-9 is that standard depression questionnaire, right? 9 questions.
Correct. It's what clinicians use to track symptoms.
And a 4% drop. I mean, that sounds like it could be barely noticeable to the person themselves. It's not like a sudden miraculous cure.
That's the key. It's not about feeling cured. It's a small, objective signal that the biological mechanism has been successfully engaged. It's the first sign that the ship is turning, even if you can't feel the turn yet.
That is so important for setting expectations. But it brings up the flip side, the critical caution. What if you're the person who doesn't hit that 4.1% mark after dose 2?
And we have to be so clear about this. Non-improvement early on does not mean failure.
Say that again?
Early non-improvement does not predict failure. In the study, almost 47.5% of the people who showed zero improvement after dose 2 still went on to get a partial or full response by the end.
So the takeaway is, early success is a great sign, but a lack of early success means you absolutely need to stick with it.
You have to stick with it. The real story might just be starting.
Okay, so that early marker is about what happens during treatment. Let's zoom out now to the bigger picture from that huge review of 112 studies.
Yeah.
What did it tell us about the things that predict success before you even walk in the door?
Well, the biggest story here is actually about what doesn't predict success. And that's incredibly reassuring.
It's busting the myths.
Totally. They looked at 68 different variables, and most of them showed no connection to the outcome at all.
Okay, let's run through some of them. What about basic demographics? Like, am I too old for this to work? Does it work better for men or women?
Nope. The evidence was overwhelming on this. Age and sex had no association with the antidepressant effects, things like marital status or your education level. Also nothing. Ketamine just seems to work across those lines.
What about the depression itself? A lot of people worry that their illness is just too severe or that they've had it for too long.
And again, generally, no. Baseline depression severity wasn't a factor. Whether you were moderate or severe didn't seem to change how well ketamine worked. Same for how many years you've had depression or how long your current episode has been.
That is huge. That really pushes back against that feeling of, I'm a lost cause, I've been sick for a decade, nothing can touch this.
It does. And it gets even more powerful when you look at trauma and other conditions.
Right, so what if you also have an anxiety disorder? Or a history of something like psychosis or suicide attempts?
Typically, no strong influence. And that smaller real-world study confirmed it. They found that a history of adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, or having PTSD symptoms, did not change how well the ketamine worked for depression.
So your trauma history doesn't disqualify you. Your anxiety doesn't block it.
That's what the data suggests. And finally, the big one, the experience itself, the dissociation.
Ah, yes. The idea that you have to have a really intense mystical experience for it to work.
It seems to be a myth. They looked at the intensity of dissociation, measured with a clinical scale, and largely found no significant link to how well the antidepressant effect worked. 17 studies found no link versus just 2 that did.
So you don't have to worry if your infusion feels mild. It doesn't mean it's not working on a biological level.
Correct. The overall message is one of incredible breadth. Ketamine seems to be effective for a very wide range of people, regardless of their background, their history, or even how the treatment feels in the moment.
Okay, so most things don't matter, but some things do. What did the studies find that did have some predictive power?
This is where it gets really specific, and it all centers on one idea: treatment resistance, but a very specific kind.
It's not about the severity of the depression, but about what? The history of trying other things.
Exactly. The retrospective analysis found a really significant negative link between the number of failed antidepressant trials in your lifetime and your outcome with ketamine.
So the more medications you've tried that haven't worked,
The less likely ketamine is to work. And they found a pretty clear cutoff point:
which was?
more than 6. Patients who had tried and failed more than 6 different antidepressants in their life were 78% less likely to respond to ketamine.
78%. That is a huge drop-off.
Yeah.
So that number 6 seems to be a real line in the sand for this kind of pharmacological resistance.
It really does. It's a key factor to consider.
So what about other heavy-duty treatments? Does a history of something like ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, or TMS also predict a worse outcome?
And this is maybe one of the most interesting findings. The answer is no. A history of receiving those neuromodulation treatments, ECT or TMS, did not influence ketamine outcomes.
So the resistance seems to be specific to the drugs, to the pharmacology, not to brain stimulation therapies.
That's right. The negative predictor was purely about the number of failed antidepressant meds, not about having had ECT or TMS in the past, a crucial distinction.
Were there any other, maybe less expected predictors that popped up in the big review?
There were a couple of surprising ones that showed a positive link. A family history of substance use disorder was actually reported as a positive predictor in 6 different studies.
Huh. So if addiction runs in your family, ketamine might be more likely to work for your depression.
It's a strange finding, but it suggests there might be some shared biological pathway there. The other one was body mass index, or BMI. It was a bit mixed, but 8 studies reported high BMI as a positive predictor. But that one, well, it definitely needs more research.
This has been incredibly focused. Let's try to boil it all down. If you're listening, what are the 2 most powerful opposing forces we've identified?
On one side, the biggest positive signal you can get is that tiny, almost unnoticeable improvement of just 4.1% on your PHQ-9 score after your second dose.
If you get that, the data says you're on the path to success.
Perfectly. And on the other side, the biggest headwind, the strongest negative predictor, is a history of more than 6 failed antidepressant trials. That significantly lowers your odds.
Which brings us to a final, really provocative thought. When we look at that data, especially the finding about ECT and TMS history not mattering, it raises a big question about the treatment timeline, doesn't it?
It really does. I mean, if ketamine works across all these different severities, and it's not affected by a history of neuromodulation, but it is dampened by a long history of failed meds.
Shouldn't it be considered earlier, before you get to that 7th or 8th failed medication, maybe even before something like ECT, which can have a much heavier cognitive burden?
That's the question the evidence forces us to ask. It's a conversation you should be having with your clinician. Where does this therapy fit best? The answer might be much earlier than we used to think.
Thank you for joining us for this detailed exploration of the source material. We encourage you to use this knowledge wisely as you explore your own treatment paths.